flipped over to the light side. And you know, I was busy doing all kinds of other stuff, and over the years he kept pounding on me until he finally got me so freaked out that for the last 10 years I have been obsessed with this stuff and engaged with it. So that's just kind of a little background. So I'm not a cradle environmentalist by a long shot. I was in the oil business myself, and in computers and AI and robotics and a lot of other things. Okay, the bad stuff. Okay, so I want to get started here by looking at the first slide, and that slide has a little quote from Rudolf Steiner, which is of course obligatory at the Anthroposophical Society. Sorry? Can you expand it? And because it was bigger earlier. Yeah. So just while he's working on that, the healthy social life is found when the mirror of each human soul, the whole community is shaped, and when in the community lives the strength of each human soul. So from that, I get that it's a mutual relationship between the community spirit and the human soul. Oops, what do we got?
Don't worry, just keep going. I'm sorry.
I lost my. Anyway, the actual image that was there is from a very famous person who's involved in regenerating cultures. His name is Daniel Wall. I don't know whether you ever read his book, Building Regenerative Cultures, but he worked at the Schumacher Institute and studied there, and then he's made his life of teaching us how to do that. And that particular image that you saw up there, you might have seen the lemniscate inside that thing. So this guy, in spirit, is certainly an anthroposophist, even though I'm not sure that he's ever acknowledged that. But he's an extraordinary visionary, and he has taught me a lot from his work. Anyway, what I'd like to start out with is basically say that as we are taught in speech class, that you tell them, right? You tell them what you told them, and then you tell them again, right? So I'm going to start out with 4 points that I'm hopefully going to make clear, or let's say it's sort of a summary of what I'm going to try to say. And if I can get them up here, I can actually tell you what they are. However, I probably can remember some of it. And the first one is that we have a big challenge ahead of us. Are you able to get it up? Okay. So the first one is that we have our current economic system is an extraordinary machine. And I use the word machine advisedly because it is in some ways very impersonal, and it is kind of running away with show off. Anyway, our current economic system, which we could call neo-capitalist, has produced more wealth and more prosperity for more people than any other system in history. That's the first thing to realize. Okay, we criticize what has been done economically in the world over and over again, and I do it myself. But there is no getting away from the fact that more people are better off than ever in history as a result of it.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. You got it. So here we go. And that's a paradox, that first point, that it's created all this wealth and prosperity. But it's done it at an enormous cost, at an existential, potentially, cost. And that's the paradox, okay? And it's the cost that I'm talking about is human-generated climate change. I'm going to blame climate change, the human part of it, on our economic system. Whoops, what happened here? And so that's tough, because to have 1 or 2 or 3 generations, or even 4 or 5 if you want to go back a bit, experience wonderful prosperity as a result of an economic system, and then have life terminated, human beings terminated on the planet thereafter, what's the point? We had thousands of years of relatively low living standard, And then in these last, what, 7 or 8 generations, it's zoomed up. And then what happens if it terminates? Is that justified? I don't think so. Interestingly enough, as part of this process, which I will explain, of the economic system generating a great deal of prosperity, it's also generated a great deal of inequality. And I will get into that in a minute. But paradoxically, that inequality may have saved our behinds. Okay? I'm just to sort of give you an anticipation. Imagine if every human being on the planet was able to live at our living standard. That would have fried the planet long ago, okay, because of the resources that we consume. So the fact that a lot of people have been kept relatively poor compared to us privileged individuals, I mean, that's very sanctimonious of me to say, probably has saved the planet for us to at least have a chance to save it, okay, for us. Second point, that's one of the things I want to make, points I want to make. Second is the solutions for fixing the cost are quite varied. People have all kinds of ideas of what we got to do about the economic system creating climate change problems, and they include growing and decarbonizing, so growing in a green way, decarbonizing, and changing up the worldview of the economic system. There's 100 different schemes that people have. Nobody's got a clear answer. The urgency is not well understood. Some people think it's imminent. We're facing extinction imminently. Other people don't think there's any problem at all. But mostly our leaders don't really understand the problem at a deep level and how urgent it really is, okay? It may not be tomorrow, but it could be next month. I mean, metaphorically speaking. The fourth point I want to make is that there is a transformation of consciousness taking place. We are seeing people wake up. We are seeing some real challenges to the social order, and that creates an opportunity. It also tells us something about maybe some historical things that are happening in the human spirit, right? In the human consciousness. That maybe this pressure, this climate change pressure, is forcing a transition from a more selfish or individualistic, egocentric to a more collaborative future, okay, more collaborative consciousness. So in that sense, it might be interesting and good. And finally, the other point I want to make is that it could result, this change in consciousness, in the emergence of a very interesting idea, which I'd like to explore with you, which is a thing called the new commons. And some of you may have heard of the commons and what that is. I will be telling you a little bit about it. But it's something that could be a new story for the future. Instead of our traditional neo-capitalist economic story, both of these are stories. We tell ourselves, there's some zeitgeist of the culture. This commons idea may turn out to be the new zeitgeist. So those are the main points I'm going to try to make throughout this presentation. Okay. So let's start with the neo-capitalist economic model. This is a standard diagram that every undergraduate who takes, or even high school student that takes economics, every professor teaches them. And it basically shows how economists, or traditionally economists, have seen how the economy works. And let's face it, any subject simplifies the world for people to understand. So this is not in detail, it's a map, it's not the terrain. The difference you understand, right? There's far too much detail in the economy for anybody to truly understand. So economists simplify it in order to be able to isolate what's important and what's not. And this is how they simplify it. They have households, they have firms, and they have government. Originally, they didn't even have government, right? That was kind of a side issue, but since the war, since the Depression, government became a very important player, so it's now in the picture. And basically, firms and households, mediated by the government, interact with each other. The households have again, this is a big simplification with much justification. Are the owners of land, and that which means also natural resources, labor, capital, and managerial and entrepreneurial talent. It's just assumed that's the case, right? It doesn't tell you how they got all that stuff, where it came from, why they have it rather than government or the firms, but we start out with that assumption that the households have that. And the households take that and they go into what's called the factor market, a market where you exchange, you know what a market is, I hope, which is buyers and sellers get together in a place, whether electronically or in person, and they offer for a given price what they have, and they come to an agreement as to what the right price should be. And it's called the equilibrium price, and then people who want to pay that price pay it. People who don't play in the market. People who want to offer what they're offering at the price that's on offer, they do it. They're there. People who don't feel that their labor or their capital is worth more, don't participate at that price. So that's called a factor market, and that's where the households take their assets, so to speak, and sell them to firms. What do the firms do with them? The firms transform these land resources, labor, capital, and talent. And remember, these guys are both households and firms, are working in firms at the same time, but we'll make that distinction right now. They transform all this into products and services, and they sell those products and services to these households that have just earned money from the firms for what they have. They sell them here in what's called the product market, or market for goods and services. And that's how the firms earn money, right? To go on doing business, staying in business. So it's kind of a circular process. In between, you have the government that guarantees the integrity of those markets, guarantees private property and all that sort of thing, provides security, some confidence and what have you. It has to be a kind of a mediator, because before the government was there was all kinds of chaos. And, bad stuff happened. It still happens, but government kind of sits in the middle and kind of makes this thing work. And it also needs goods and services itself, because it provides essential things like roads and bridges and law courts and military security and all the rest of it. There's also this animal that turns out to be much more important than the economists appreciated for a long, long time, and that's the financial markets. And they are private savings going into financial institutions which invest in goods and services, or in the firms, but also in the goods and services market. And they turn out to be actually almost the dominant player. Originally, they were not considered very seriously. Now, that's kind of a transactional view of things at the kind of micro level or the industry level. We have a thing called microeconomics, which deals with that. After the Great Depression, World War II, when the government got involved in the economy and macroeconomics was born, concerned with the whole economy, this was transposed and summarized by the new macroeconomists. And they said, well, we add up all those households and all those firms, and we get national activity, national accounts, national demand and national supply, okay? And so and we need to get a handle on, what the value is of all that for the whole nation. And so they dreamt up this thing called the gross domestic product. And I will be coming back to that in a minute. And that's basically the national income of the whole country, okay? They figured out how to add all these things up and to come up with the national income of the country. And there's a formula that every student learns. It's called the gross domestic product formula. And we use Y for gross domestic product. I don't know why, but we do. And it says gross domestic product equals consumption, consumers, plus business investment, plus government, plus net exports, and that's what our national income is. If you add all that up, that's what our national, and they divided the world up that way, okay? In the United States, it turns out, and most modern economies, consumption is 65% of that national income or gross national product. Business investment, that's in plant equipment and machinery and training and services. It's not financial investment. That turns out to be about 15%, and government's about 20%. And net exports can go up or down depending on whether we are selling more abroad or whether people, or we're bringing in more stuff from abroad. So exports are when you sell to other countries. Imports are when you buy from other countries. And if you're exporting more than you're importing, that means that you're raising the GDP, the Y. Or if you're importing more than you're exporting, you reduce the GDP or the Y. So that's kind of how they were able to look at the whole world, look at all these countries, look at individual countries. This whole system is basically driven by growth. You have to keep growing in order, because you want that GDP to keep growing, right? So that people have more goods and services. That's the idea. And more money, and government has more. So it's a growth-driven machine. And macroeconomists in the government and elsewhere are concerned mainly about three factors. A, growing the economy. B, whether or not people are all employed. C, is there inflation? Is our money losing value, or is it, when we see growth, is it real growth in goods and services, or is it just money growth? And finally, there's a particular interest in some tools that they have to make sure that all this is working well. And they're called fiscal and monetary tools, and that means the government can put money into the economy or pull money out to, if you like, make sure these things are working well, that GDP is growing, that inflation is kept at a modest level, and unemployment is kept at a modest level. So that's kind of the big picture of the neoclassical or the neo-capitalist model. There's a couple of things that I need to point out about it, and we'll get into more detail about it. Debt, interest, return on investment, and equity fuel an incredibly out of control growth process that goes in cycles. It goes up and down, but it's always going upward. They're pushing it upward. They have to push it upwards to cover debt because there's interest on debt. People borrow money. They invest in stocks. The stocks have to keep going up. So this drives a demand for ever increasing growth, irrespective, for everybody to be able to function. And that growth so far has been powered by hydrocarbons. The actual energy that goes into allowing all those goods and services to be made are hydrocarbons, oil, gas, and coal mainly. So you can see where I'm going with this, right? And the other thing that's particularly interesting about this is it privileges, and we'll come back to why it's important, private property and ownership rights. The whole thing depends on that, because if you don't own your plant and equipment or what you acquire, you're not motivated to invest in the future. And you've got to invest in the future for the machine to keep going, okay? So they're very focused. The system is very focused on protecting property rights and ownership rights. The other thing is, and I'll come to this in a minute, it pretty much ignores the environment, except as what's called an externality, something that impinges on this model but is not fundamental to it. And that can be dealt with by regulation or some kind of pricing mechanism. And it ignores the voluntary economy that exists, the huge unpaid services that are out there, which are gigantic. Okay. So this whole system has a theory about human beings. And its theory is that human beings, people, persons, are what's called Homo economicus. Basically, they are economic people. What are economic people? Well, the way they understand economic people, they are people who are rational, and they make decisions doing a very careful cost-benefit analysis of anything they do. They see whether the costs are greater than the benefits, they don't do it. If the benefits are greater than the cost, then they do. They're very self-focused. especially on wealth creation, okay? And they are competitive and transaction-based to the extent that they're cooperative. I mean, they have to cooperate. Homo economics, people have often said Homo economicus is independent, self-centered. That's true, but he still has, or she still has to cooperate with other human beings in order to get stuff built or done, right? It's not emotional cooperation or relational cooperation. It's transactional cooperation. So when anybody tells you that it's purely, that economic man is just purely a self-oriented and independent, that's not true. They have to be cooperative, but it's very transactional. And they are focused on accumulating wealth, and their notion of accumulating wealth is to achieve freedom and to achieve progress. Their idea of freedom and progress is to increase the supply of goods and services in the economy at an ever faster rate, ever increasing rate. And that's what they mean by freedom. If we do the calculations, just the way they set it up, it turns out the United States GDP, its national income in 2018, just to give you some number ideas, was $21 trillion. That's a huge number, $21 trillion. The world GDP, that's the whole world, they're able to calculate that. It's about $80 trillion. US wealth is a multiple of US national income or income, approximately 5 times that. That's an average. So wealth, that you have, like your house and your stocks or whatever, it's about $100 trillion. World wealth is about $17 trillion. And then the debt that goes with all that, because I said it was debt driven to a considerable extent, is a whopping $244 trillion. So it's almost the same size as world wealth, or getting there, okay? Just to frame the situation a little bit for you.
Geoff, can we ask a question?
Yeah.
So if global debt is only 70 trillion below world wealth,
yes,
then wouldn't
we're a debt-fueled world.
And that's different. There's another thing to say, I think is near it. The people who own the debt, they're the wealthy people.
Right, that's also true, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Okay.
Well, just think about your own situation when you were younger, maybe not now. You borrow money to buy a house, right?
Right.
So you have equity, and you have whatever savings you had, but you're underwater for a long time, right? Unless you're rich and have an inheritance. That mortgage is bigger than any, you're in negative wealth at that point.
Right. Let me just try to word it separately, which is, it sounds then like the world true wealth is only 70 trillion. If you take away the debt, which is a negative wealth, from the accounted wealth.
That's a complicated story that I'll come to in a minute. Okay? That's a complicated story. I don't want to get too complicated with it, but that's an interesting point. Okay. So, is there some paradoxical consequences? I already, announced I was going to talk about the paradoxes, about how this whole machine works. I'm going to get into a little bit more detail about those paradoxes. So, we have generated all this wealth, and this new consciousness is emerging. We've got some conflict, instability at the same time. But like I said, we've created unprecedented wealth and income for a brief few generations. And just some numbers, again, to situate things for you. About 400 million people in the last 20 or 30 years have been pulled out of poverty. At least the poverty defined for their country and as the economists see it. Now, you and I may not think going from $1.50 a day to $2.50 a day is a big deal, right? But that's a huge deal for people in Africa, okay? So I'm talking about that kind of getting them out of poverty. It actually makes their living standard acceptable and reasonable in certain parts of the world, okay? But huge numbers of people have been pulled out of extreme poverty where they couldn't eat the next day, or their children couldn't, to being able to eat by this machine. All right, so that gives you kind of a frame. An interesting thing is also that at least measured by the tools that we have in this neo-capitalist system, the global per capita, per person GDP has grown from about $450, right, a year. Remember, we're looking at the whole world now, not just the United States and Europe. In 1960 to $11,000 per capita today. The average in the whole world is $11,000 per capita. That's an unimaginable increase. And that's why
value, is that present value or is that?
That's in current dollars.
The 450 is that?
So yeah, that's been, that was.
That's sort of the present value.
Right, okay. So that's a gigantic increase.
Yeah, that's true.
And how much is that inflation?
Sorry, yeah, sorry, no, he's right. That's not
It's not correct.
It's not a real number. It's not real dollars against an index somewhere. It's in current dollars. In current dollars.
So it's $450 in 1960,
You're right,
which is inflated.
Yeah, that's
So
that's correct. That's correct. So if you want to get it in real dollars, that growth isn't nearly as great, but it's still huge. Okay.
It also shows that a big part of this is that inflation is also.
There is an important inflation factor, but even in counting the inflation factor, it's still a huge increase.
And the increase took place how?
Basically,
More capital was floating around, so there was more people.
we burned a lot of energy. We produced a lot of goods. We had a lot of free trade. We had industrialization. We had population growth. You know, but it didn't grow as fast as the actual huge increase in the value of
More
everything.
people were earning more money.
Money. You know, so if you want to get that in real terms, it's probably instead of being like 20 or 30 times, it's probably about 10 times or 8 times. That's still extraordinary. That's never happened in history. Never happened in history.
That quickly,
This quickly. But we've never burned as much energy as I'll show you that quickly either, and created so much climate trouble as quickly either. Okay. I told you the financial sector was getting pretty uppity here, and it's grown from about 5 or 6% to in the last 20 years, 10 or 20 years, to about 17% of global GDP. And there are plenty of people who would argue, and I'd be one of them, that that's parasitical, that money that they earn, a lot of it is just, you know, it's highway robbery. It's creaming off huge amounts of money from the global economy. When a financial sector, I've done some looking at this, should never be about, even in the conventional economic system, it shouldn't be more than about 5 or 6%. And it's up to 17%, according to the World Bank, which is insane. It's basically expropriation by the guys who bankrupted everybody in 2008 and 9. Okay. So here's a few kind of pictures, since Judy inspired me by her example of all these wonderful pictures, just to give you a feel for this. So if we go back 2,000 years, that's the GDP per capita, you know, looking retrospect. It's pretty flat line, right? And then about 1800, 1780, 1800, it almost goes straight up. I mean, that's unsustainable, first of all. But second of all, it's stunning, right? And I told you that was in current dollars, GDP. Thank you for catching me on that. So that just shows you what happened. This is the global story, and it's mixed in terms of, you know, there's a lot of, I told you there's a lot of inequality created. But this kind of tells you, you know, the difference between what's called low income, lower middle income, upper middle, high income, and countries that are not in what's called the OECD and countries that are. The The OECD is the Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development. It's a rich man or rich woman or rich person's club. It's basically all the developed, quote, developed countries, basically Europe, Canada, United States, Australasia, Hong Kong, Singapore. Those countries kind of got together and have this club to sort of figure out how they can continue to be prosperous, but also help poorer countries. And so that shows you, again, the huge difference between countries. But there's been some movement as we've over these periods, 1995, 2005, and 2014. Some of the upper middle and even and countries have done better, and some of the very rich countries have actually done worse in the last few years. Okay. This is inflation adjusted now. This is a look at average household incomes in the United States, and it's done by quintile, and it shows you that the top 5% have done extremely well. The top 20% have done pretty nicely, not nearly as well. And then you've got sort of almost a flat line for all the other quintiles, okay? And this is well-known stuff. But the interesting thing is the numbers. I mean, when you talk about a per capita income in adjusted dollars of $400,000 or $225,000 today, I mean, that's.
What are the bottom ones? I can't read the bottom.
These are like $100,000 for the $100,000 for the second quintile. The middle quintile sort of is about 50. Well, it's $61,000. So the average family today, at the median, at 50%, is making about $61,000. That's quite a lot of money compared to the rest of the world. Okay.
Geoff, it would be interesting on this someday on this graph to superimpose on it how many people are involved in the average household. Right. Because I think that number is dropping.
Yeah, it has dropped.
And except in the higher incomes, in the lower incomes, it's dropping, but way slower.
Way slower. Yeah, I think that's a very good refinement that I definitely should do. That would help. Again, all I'm trying to do with these charts is just reinforce what I said. Here's an interesting chart that shows you, the inequality. The top 0.001% and the top 0.1%. They're basically what they've been able to capture from the economy is quite stunning. And we thought that they lost quite a lot. And that's relative to the rest of the world. They lost quite a lot after the Great Depression and for a long time after World War II, because incomes were kept down by high incomes by severe taxation. Right? The Eisenhower era, the Republican era, had marginal tax rates of about 80 to 90% on wealthy people. It had wealth taxes. Now the Republicans could forget that little history. We had to pay back the debt from World War II, right? Okay, but again, we're back to the Gilded Age. Incredible. 0.01% of the population has 10% of the income. That's just unimaginable. Here's again showing the richest Americans have had huge amounts of growth, and the bottom 20% have had virtually no growth at all.
Wait, go back. Guess what happened in 2007?
Right.
The stock market crashed.
Right. So all the guys that had their money in the stock market. So why do you think governments pump up the stock market? Because the guys who are contributing to their campaigns lost their shirts for a little while, right? Okay. And then here's an interesting one that really drives it home. The richest 0.1% take 188 times as much as the bottom 90%. That includes most of us, I suspect. I mean, that's just unbelievable, okay? So there's some kind of power law at work here. Now, I want to just go back to the energy question, because this is all driven by an amazing amount of energy being consumed, right? produce and consume. You notice that we had this almost straight up curve on terms of the GDP. Well, you're seeing the same thing kind of going on in parallel with the energy consumption. The energy consumption has gone virtually straight up, and that's kind of the distribution of how the energy works out, what kind of energy we're consuming. You'll notice that biofuels are a tiny proportion of all that. It's all coal, oil, and a little bit of nuclear, but it's coal, oil, and natural gas. Yeah, the hydroelectrics are a tiny little sliver up there. Even nuclear isn't that much. Here's some more detailed figures, but I'm not going to waste your time on this. The bottom line on these is that those energy breakdowns is that even though we like to talk a good game about the greening of the world and that we're going to bring in alternative energy, we're spending very little on it right now. Even though we're getting all these wind farms going and all these solar plants and what have solar energy stuff, it's still a very small proportion of our overall energy consumption. We're still burning fossil fuels like crazy, and we're going to go on burning them unless somebody does something about it. The Chinese, for example, are going to build several hundred coal-fired plants around the world. They've already made the contracts for the next 10, 20, 30 years. And coal is the worst of the fossil fuels. And my father, who I told you was a pretty big expert on this, said any sensible program to try to save the planet needs to shut all the coal plants down right now. And he's supported by some things I'm going to show you in a minute. Okay, so what about apart from the inequality I showed you in the graph, we don't just talk about income inequality, it's also responsibility for harming the planet inequality, okay? So the wealthiest 1 billion people, we got about 7.5 billion people, the wealthiest 1 billion contribute 60% of the greenhouse gases that are produced from all these energy things. The poorest 3 billion only contribute 5% of the greenhouse gases. So not only are these guys stealing everybody else's, I mean, making out like gangbusters, right? Although 1 billion people, that's a lot. They're also burning up the planet. So these poor people, right, which is the great majority, who are also parenthetically the most vulnerable to climate change because they're often located in areas that could be flooded or have these terrible weather events. Not only are they not getting much of the pie, but they're also the one, and not only are they not causing much of the problem with the greenhouse gases, but they're also the ones that are going to take it in the neck when bad things start, which are already happening, are happening. So you've got sort of a double whammy here, a double injustice. And I think you know that it's been in the press, 42 billionaires have more wealth than 3.5 billion people on the planet. To me, that's just insane. Any economic system that generates that, pretty problematic ethically. But like I said, if all those people had an American or a European living standard, we would have been fried a long time ago. So it's kind of a paradox. And just to show you that a little bit more graphically, these wealthy people, or at least semi-wealthy people, because 1 billion people aren't all wealthy like Americans, but still they're wealthier than most others. They also have a much heavier ecological footprint. Okay, do you know what an ecological footprint is? That's basically how much resources do you as an individual consume every day? I mean, what does the average American or the average European consume? And the economists have figured out a way to measure this, and they call it the global hectare. Okay, and I won't go into the details, but it takes into account a hectare's worth of resources, and it's water, and it's other things, like minerals and trees and everything else. But they have this measure, and the footprint tells us that Americans have a footprint, pretty massive footprint of 8 global hectares, and say a Bengali would have less than 1 global hectare in terms of consuming resources from the world. So that's another way of thinking about it. The average capacity that the Earth has, as far as we understand it, and that depends on technology to some extent, but generally speaking, the capacity that the world can handle is an average footprint for everybody on the planet, for the 7.5 billion people, of about 1.63 GHA. And right now, the average is 2.75. So I'll come back to this. But that means that we are consuming more than a planet's worth of resources, okay? Probably 40% more than in other words, 1.4 planets we're consuming. So that's the way people talk about it. That's everybody, okay? And this is kind of a nice graphic. It shows how many planets. If everybody was consuming, like Americans, we would be consuming 4 planets worth, right? If everybody was consuming like an Indian, we would be fine. We'd be well in budget. We're still over the mark in places like Argentina and South Africa. If everybody lived like these guys, we'd still be in trouble, okay? And they don't live that great. So that's another way of thinking. Another thing that has to do with the injustice I talked about is basically the world's waste, okay? And if we look at the United States, which has 5% of the world's population, number one, we consume 30% of the world's resources, and we also generate 30% of the world's waste, and we only have 5% of the population. Okay, let me go back to this. So the standard economic model tells us that it's okay, we can deal with this. A guy called Simon Kuznets, so I'll come back to in a minute, who started the GDP and who was very important in World War II, came up with this, this graph that said, okay, yeah, we pollute a lot as we get richer. But once we get to a certain point of wealth, certain level of wealth, we start to be much more environmentally concerned. And as more people get richer, eventually they'll become much more environmentally conscious, and the environmental destruction will start to go down. So you can see this here, right?
When is that supposed to?
Well, that's the interesting question. Have we burned up the planet before we get there? I mean, there is evidence that we have been cutting back and being much more efficient and much more environmentally conscious. But if it takes too long, we're gone, right? So that's Simon Kuznets' contribution, among many others, okay, to our understanding of what, that this is all perfectly natural and it all gets sorted out, okay? So what about impacts from a climate change point of view? The World Bank estimates that if we reach, Judy talked a little bit about the threshold points, if we get up to 2.5 degrees centigrade in terms of average heat, that's going to knock 15% of our GDP out globally. If we get up to 3 degrees, it's going to knock a quarter of it. That's massive. That's worse than the Great Depression, okay? And that could happen a lot sooner than we think. It's all to do with the way we manufacture and consume. It's basically what we call a cradle-to-grave economy. It goes from raw materials production, use, consumption, and then it's just put in waste landfills. I mean, we do some recycling, but overall not much. We are using 92 billion tons of minerals, fossil fuels, metals, and biomass every year. And it's going to probably double or triple over the next few years. And I won't go into the climate change options. Depending on which scenario you believe is going to happen, we could get into a situation where we're well above 3 degrees. I told you that greenhouse gases are being created, but we know that from different parts of the economy. And then this is the breakdown of what's contributing. You can see electricity, industry, and transport are the big ones. They're responsible for most of the emissions. And these 20 companies, so we can zero in on these on the bad guys, are the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases. In fact, if you take 100 of them, it's a huge percentage of all the greenhouse gases. I have a list of 100 that are generated. So if we could get them to behave, or we could change their behavior, we'd be halfway there, or 3/4 of the way there. Okay. So just to end this part of it, and I'm running way over time, but anyway. The Australian government, who is not run by one Donald J. Trump, actually takes an interest in these things. And they had a report commissioned for them. It was called Disaster Alley Climate Change. And here were this was actually certified as legit and real and correct by an Undersecretary of Defense in the United States. So she wrote the foreword to this thing. And the conclusion is we face an existential risk of ending human civilization as we know it relatively soon. These risks are neither understood or willfully ignored across the public and private sectors. And they advocate basically a World War II type mobilization, or better, more. And we got to shut down coal right now. And that we have to organize outside the conventional political process if we want to live or survive. That's a report that was accepted and signed off on by the Australian government and backed up by an Undersecretary of Defense of the United States government.
When was this on?
About 3 years ago. It's been updated, and the conclusions stand. It's been updated this year.
The Australians are using more coal.
That's right.
Yeah, and the PM, the Australian PM,
He's an idiot, but the bureaucrats,
there's so much.
went ahead and did this and signed off on it.
They signed off on the report that they're not changing their.
No, I understand. I'm not pretending the Australians have done anything better than anybody else. But the fact that a government report was published that said this tells us something. It's not just a bunch of green crazies going around saying, oh, we're going to go to hell in a handbasket tomorrow, right? It's the Australian government's bureaucracy that's saying that. Yeah?
Is it available?
It is available. It's all these sort. I'm going to make this PowerPoint. I'm going to make this PowerPoint all available. It's got all the references.
Maybe you show military studies next.
I don't have the military studies, but the military, actually the largest greenhouse gas emitter in the world is the United States military. But we won't get into that right now. Okay. So responses. How do people feel we need to respond to this? Well, there are all kinds of different approaches to responding. And before I do that, really quickly, I want to say that there was a very famous economist called Donella Meadows. I don't know whether any of you ever heard of her. She and Jay Forster were sort of helped start the Club of Rome, which were the first people who got interested in looking at climate and using what's called systems analysis or systems thinking to look at all this. They kind of invented that whole approach. And they did an analysis back in 1972, right, of this whole situation of our, unsustainable world. And they came to, the graphs look almost exactly like they turned out to be, and they predicted exactly what's with much simpler. They didn't have a lot of computers or anything, but they just took some basic assumptions, and they looked what projected into the future, right? And they came up with what has actually transpired. Well, Donella came up with a whole way of looking at how you analyze systems that are helpful for understanding this stuff. She came up with 12 leverage points, places where you could intervene in the system that you ought to think about intervening, right? And it starts with, basically, done backwards, is in terms of importance. You first look at the numbers, and you see if you can change those numbers. Then you look at the buffers, the things that are stabilizing or destabilizing that are available to compensate. Then you look at the stocks and flows. What's flowing and what's constant and what's moving around. See if you can intervene there. You look at delays and things happening. See if you can intervene there. You look at the feedback loops and see if you can intervene there. You look at reinforcing and balancing feedback loops. You look at information flows, self-organization, the way the system looks at the world, and any kind of transcendence that would be possible. That was her vision of how you analyze the problem. And she said their systems have a tendency to create or get into traps. Not because people are willful, but they just get into traps. And those traps are policy resistance, the tragedy of unregulated commons. That means everybody's using resources without regenerating them, public resources. There's a drift to low performance if there's not energy and regeneration going on. The successful get more successful because those reinforcing loops tend to benefit people who have been controlling the system. And that can create all kinds of problems. So they're winners and losers. People are constantly trying to shift around responsibility for problems that exist in the system. We see that in our healthcare system, for example, hospitals shifting around costs. People start to break the rules or bend the rules when things go wrong or when people are pointing the finger. And most importantly, systems get into trouble because they are seeking the wrong goal. Right? So if you build the greatest car in the world, but it's running on fossil fuels, your goal's wrong. You build a great electric car, maybe, but don't build a great internal combustion car. Okay. Another approach, the conventional economic model was challenged by a young woman. Women are heroes in this story, by the way. So we got Donella Meadows, who figured out we had a climate problem back in 1972. And now we have Kate Walworth, who an Englishwoman, who took some data on our going beyond the limits of what the planet could handle, and she said we got to reimagine economics and look upon it as a donut where we have this ecological ceiling. We got to build that into economics. We have the social foundation, and we've got to keep within the ecological ceiling, but we've got to fix all these shortfalls that so many people in the world have: energy, water, food, health, education, and so forth, if we're really going to tackle things correctly. It's called donut economics. It's revolutionized how economists think. They're starting to revolutionize how economists think about things. She said basically the economic system is embedded in the environment. She convinced a lot of people. So we started to look at this kind of a model, which is production and consumption. You've got ecosystem services, you've got resources, you've got energy. It's going around in a circle, and you've got waste that's going out, but you try to push it back, get rid of it, and restore the ecosystem services. Now, what are ecosystem services? They're all the things that the ecosystems, nature does for us, like naturally getting carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere through trees. It basically disinfects and cleans with sunlight coming down on wetlands and so forth. Hundreds and hundreds and thousands of different things that nature does to support life on this earth. Those are called ecosystem services. Another approach so changing the economic paradigm is one way, try to get people to think more as the environment as being part of economics. Another approach to try to deal with this problem of climate change or the failure of the economic system to avoid existential risks to everybody, even though it's producing all this so-called prosperity. You may have heard of the Sustainable Development Goals. Back in 2015, everybody got together in Paris and decided, okay, we're going to try to, including the United States, we're going to try to have some goals about what we're going to do in order to make sure we don't fry the planet and that people have a chance, and we meet the needs of donut economics. And they came up with the 17 goals, which in my opinion were too many, because people get lost if you try to do 17. And getting nations to change their behavior on 17 things is just not a good thing. And so you can see what these are. It's sort of like no poverty, all the good stuff, quality education, life on land, make sure water is working well, climate action, all these great ideas. They had indicators, and then each country was supposed to meet certain goals. depending on their situation. And that would allow us to get to a safe world, right? Inside that donut, right? Inside that environmentally safe area. So what happened? A report just came out. Some of you may know Jeffrey Sachs. He was a famous economist, kind of environmentalist. He did a study for the UN last year. Conclusion was no country is on track to achieve SDGs. Conflicts are leading to reversal in some of those things. Progress in sustainable production and consumption patterns, and i.e. getting the economy to change it the way it does things, too slow. And high-income countries are generating all kinds of negative spillovers. So nowhere have we gone with this. And we're going to have a climate conference in Madrid, I believe it is, or Barcelona, in December. Another one of these international climate conferences. And we'll be interested to see what they say about all this. It's in December. Okay, another approach has been one that has to deal with this problem of climate change and the economy. A guy called Paul Hawken, some of you may have heard of him. He's an entrepreneur, environmentalist. He started a program called Drawdown, and he basically looked at all the things that we needed to basically start pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere. Things like wind turbine, refrigeration, changing how we do refrigeration, tropical forests, regenerative agriculture, afforestation, conservation agriculture, geothermal, on and on and on. How we stop putting more carbon into the atmosphere and how we pull down stuff. There's 100 of these, and more power to it. He identified everything we need to do, but we haven't made a whole lot of progress with that either, unfortunately.
Figured out how much each one would cost.
It figured out how much, and interestingly, there is actually a considerable return. He also figured out what they would contribute to reducing, the problem. And he figured out the costs and the benefits for each one of them. And he showed benefits over a period of time outweighing the costs quite considerably. Made no difference. It's not organized. Everybody's doing their thing. We go around, we look at all these projects. They look great. They refer to Paul Hawken and Drawdown, and they're doing their drawdown thing. But it's not coordinated. And it hasn't had a very big net impact. The United States CO2 emissions have gone up in the last few years, haven't gone down. And we're supposed to have dropped considerably. They are incredibly important and they are fundamental, but they haven't made much progress with those either, quite frankly. And actually, that was the big surprise. They figured out that those 2 or 3 things that we wouldn't have associated with climate change would have more impact on climate change than anything else, because women have tremendous influence, especially in poor countries, on what happens. I won't go into this detail. I mean, there's been some issues about, Judy can comment on this, but the Heritage Foundation, which is Republican conservative, but they do have some good scientists and economists, some of them. They've shown that, okay, yeah, solar has dropped, you talked about that last night. Solar has dropped dramatically, the cost, right? So has wind. But you won't get those 10x improvements anymore because we're reaching the physical limits, the physics limits. So we're not going to get another, like with silicon, with computers, we're not going to get a 10-fold drop again. We're done. We've reached the limit. Okay? And batteries do not have the power of fossil fuels in terms of the conversion from energy input to power output anywhere close, even the lithium-ion batteries. And we've reached the limits of what we can do to reduce their costs. Okay. Another approach to trying to deal with climate change in the economy is to start suing people. Use the legal system. And so organizations have gotten together to start suing companies that knew about the threat of climate change using fossil fuels like Exxon and didn't do anything about it. And governments as well. In fact, there are legal groups that are trying to get ecocide, the destruction of the planet or destruction of the ecosystems, to be a crime against humanity. We have these crimes, and the International Court of The Hague has these crimes that you can be sued on or can be arrested for. Okay, things like imprisoning and killing people, and genocide and things like that. But there is no crime against nature, right? They're trying to get that included and they're having some success. But again, it's slow and it hasn't made a huge impact. There's a couple of big lawsuits going on right now against ExxonMobil, and the children have gotten together, the younger generations, and have put a lawsuit against government. So it's kind of interesting. It's been allowed by the big courts, the senior courts. I mentioned the World War II mobilization. In my opinion, that's the only thing that's going to save us. That's my opinion. That is not necessarily the received wisdom or the, Judy may be right when she says that we can do geoengineering and probably save the planet, maybe. I'm not convinced of that. I think the risks are huge as well. Yeah. So that's called a Hail Mary pass, right? If we have to engineer the planet because we're about to fry, okay. My second line of defense, and one which the Australian bureaucracy agrees with, is we won't need a World War II mobilization. What does that mean? Well, in World War II, we spent a lot of our GDP on converting our entire civilian economy into a war economy, and we did it very fast, and we spent a ton of money on doing it. We got 200,000 companies to convert within 2 or 3 years to a complete wartime footing. We can do this. We have shown that we can do this. And we have been willing, we spent a ton of money on it. Here's what happened. From 1940 through 1944, we went from spending on defense of under 3% of GDP to 45%. That's half our GDP almost. We were spending that for a couple of years there, all right? And it was still pretty high on into the late 40s. And then it picked up again, of course, during the Korean War. So we have done this before. That's the level of spending that's going to be. I'm not saying we need to spend 45%. That was the peak. But I'm saying if you do some of the calculations, it's probably about 20%. And we aren't anywhere close to that. My dad says, so if you were to do, let's say 20% of our GDP, that would be about $16 trillion a year, right? My dad says we can't spend that much money. We just don't have the capacity to do it. So he says 7 trillion, but we're not even close to 7 trillion. And that's where we need to be, frankly, to be able to save our planet, in my opinion. At minimum, $7 trillion a year. Okay. And one of the reasons I say that is because although the IPCC comes out and sort of gives us nice stories about how we're still, heading for 2 degrees centigrade, and that, the water may go up half a foot, over the next 100 years or what have you. They have been wrong almost every time about the time frame and the severity. They've been 40% underestimate all the way through. The Australians recognize that, and so do a lot of other people. They have underestimated the problem, or they have had to be careful politically. I mean, a lot of the scientists who work on that know damn well it's a lot more dangerous than that. And they use climate models and all the rest of it. One of the big unknowns, and Judy referred to this, is what's going to happen with that methane releases that could happen in the Arctic and the Siberian tundra, which would create havoc. Because methane is much, as you heard yesterday, or was it yesterday, is much more toxic than CO2. Okay, so I've been talking a lot about the problem, and I'm out of time, but I wanted to talk about an alternative, a new vision, the commons, right? It has to do with Rudolf Steiner. And I put this little picture together from a few other pictures because I thought about threefolding, so I took 3 ballots. I talked about transformation of our economy, and of course the old butterfly, right? We're going to go from collapsing into death as a what do you call that thing? Chrysalis, and then we're going to soar, right? We're going to go through this transformation. We're in the middle of this transformation. We go from me to we, right? So there's Steiner, right? Steiner's got our threefold system. We got to keep the economics separate from the the government, and we got to keep it separate from the culture. We have to take accountable, and they have to interact with each other. But we don't allow one to dominate the other like the market economy or the neo-capitalist economy dominates right now. We have them in dynamic equilibrium with each other. And I put in the commons in here where civil society or culture is, because I believe that that's what's could be happening, and that's how you could modify it. So another way of thinking about this is, well, I won't go into this because we don't have time. It kind of explains kind of how Steiner's thinking goes, but you probably know some of that. So what is this commons I'm talking about that I want to put in as a balancing force? It's basically something that's been around for a long time. It's basically managing all the resources, whether it's intellectual resources, the magnetic spectrum, land, mineral resources, all the things that we own as human beings collectively. People who buy that stuff and privatize it and commoditize it are doing it because they can get away with it because they're in a neo-capitalist system that allows for rights of human beings to be sold as commodities. Steiner would never allow that. His 340 would never allow that. Haven't had a chance to go into it for you. But we do, and that creates 90% of the problem, because if you get an economic right to a collective resource that you can buy and sell, you made no contribution for doing that. You just manipulated government. Okay, and so you are earning unearned income. And so much of our income today, as evidenced by the financial sector, is unearned income that we're starving to death, even though in the midst of plenty. I mean, it's basically our ability to act and to act responsibly is being taken away by this huge amount of unearned income that's not reciprocated, pulled out of the economy, or all these resources being exploited and appropriated. In fact, it's kind of the flip of the tragedy of the commons. They used to say that the commons was a tragedy because nobody owned it, so they didn't take care of it, right? That's not true. There have been commoners all over the world. Indigenous peoples, for example, 2.5 billion people around the world manage property in common. Okay, right now we have this huge underground commons economy that nobody recognizes. So we need to expand that to commons. And 3 very important ideas in the commons are: one, basically a different way of provisioning, of doing economics. We want to have a different kind of governance, which is peer governance, not hierarchical governance. And we can use modern technology to enable that. And we want to have social interactions that are intimate and relational and mutual, where the objective is not transactional, but is relational, and where care is involved. And the economy needs to be a caring economy. We need to have a stake in what we produce and what we consume. There's a whole bunch of arguments I can get into. I'm out of time about why that's so, and you'll be able to read it if I send this stuff around to you. But it's huge, and there are a lot of young people around the world working on this. And I'm going to give you a quick couple of examples of this. Another woman, Eleanor Ostrom, won the Nobel Prize in economics, even though she's a political scientist. She resuscitated the commons and said, you can run a commons effectively, and here's how. So any eco-village or community that wants to get out of the capitalist market system, follow her rules, and you have a good chance of making it work. And I can get into more of that. And this is my new model. The commons becomes the big picture. And then government and the market economy become small players, much smaller players. They can't go away overnight. You have to go through a transition, but they're there. And just to make my point, that the commons is a gigantic economy that nobody fully recognizes or hasn't been surfaced enough to make its impact felt. It's basically as big or bigger than the market economy. I ran the calculations. It's at least $82 trillion, probably twice that, if you truly value ecosystem services and women's work done for free and all the volunteering that even men do, right? But if you add all these numbers up, and also the shadow economy, all the people who work that don't report their income and stuff like that and barter with each other, I did some analysis, and at minimum, it's the same as the surface economy. if we could surface that and put it out there in the right way and organize it a bit, okay, using peer governance and using relational care focused kinds of ways of doing things, and I got a whole methodology for doing that, that would transform things, okay? I call it the care economy. Let's get the care economy up, okay? So there's some rules that are a little bit more advanced now on how to do that than Eleanor Ostrom's guy. Several extraordinary people are working in that arena. And I'll just end by talking about a few cases. One in particular, I'll go straight, well, there's two. Back in 1929, when we had and 30, 31, 32, we had the Great Depression. In Switzerland, a bunch of really enlightened businessmen got together and created the Weir Bank and the Weir currency. And now it has 60,000 companies, and they use a commons approach to doing finance and economics. And that 60,000 companies is 20% of Switzerland's private industry. It's really, or let's say 20% of the activity, not because these aren't strictly private, but they're very kind of hybrids. So it's extraordinary achievement people don't talk about. Switzerland, right? A bank, they did this, and it's been going on for 70 years. And the people who were part of it, the Weir network, did not suffer in 2008 at all. Eco-villages can be viewed as a commons, and that needs to be mobilized a lot. I'm very heavily involved in that. What I want to go to end up here is the city of Ghent in Belgium. I can't get, a guy called Michel Bouwens and a famous, I think he's an American, called David Bollier, who has written a lot about the commons and has given me a lot of ideas. We're invited by the city of Ghent, and Bouwens has lived there for a long time, to look at their system, look at their city, and give a recommendation of how they could turn their entire city and their economy into a commons economy, where citizens would propose to the city various ideas, and the city would empower them to implement those ideas. It wouldn't be driven by the city, it would be driven by the citizens, organized in what Steiner would have recognized as associations, in economic association, citizen-driven economic association. So Ghent is an interesting city because they already have 400 or 500 commons initiatives going on. Ghent's had a tradition going back to the Middle Ages of guilds and things like that, being an independent city and doing commoning type activity. So they were a great test bed, and so these guys were called in to look at our whole setup and how do we expand it massively, make it the economy. So they did a whole report which is available. I've given you all the access, it's free access. And they pull a lot of, they've been working on this for the last few years. It's a dramatic example of the commons. Just a couple of little examples. They have, a renewable energy cooperative. They have a community land trust. They have a library. They took over a defunct library and turned it into an urban commons lab. And on and on. There's just tons of projects there. You can learn a lot from Ghent. Barcelona's done the same thing. Florence has done the same thing. It's happening, folks, all over the place. In North America, stuff is happening too. Okay, so I kind of ran myself out of time. I didn't get to a lot of what I would like to, but thank you for listening to me.
Any questions?
Oh, yeah. Sorry, any questions? Yeah. No, I'm okay because I ran you out of time. So you go ahead. I'll come to you in a second.
Thinking about the oil crisis that Cuba went through.
Yeah.
Is any of that offered hope? In other words, we put a cold turkey and oil importation.
Yeah, Cuba's been, actually, there's a lot of commenting that goes on in Cuba, and Cuba actually has been extraordinarily resilient. They have a lot of human rights abuse problems and issues with the government, but if you take the big picture, what they were able to do, the sustainability of people's lives with healthcare and with, and it has been quite remarkable. And there's a lot to be learned from the Cuban experience. And Michael Moore talked about that a little bit. That's controversial because, of course, there's a lot of political prisoners and the rest of it. Yeah.
And Mondragon, Spain?
Yeah, Mondragon, yes.
Mondragon.
When I got interested in this initially by looking at Mondragon. And of course, everybody sort of looks at Mondragon because a few Basque Catholic priests at the end of the 1940s decided to create this. Basically, what it was a kerosene company that would make kerosene lamps, right? And they decided to organize it on sort of commoning principles because a lot of the young people were unemployed and they needed to create some economic activity in the Basque country back then. That's, on the border between Spain and France. And this thing has grown. It's unbelievable. They've created this gigantic global corporation. I think it's now 12 or 14 billion dollars. It's a workers' cooperative, effectively. That's right. Some of the interesting features of it, the CEO can never pay himself more than 6 times the average worker's income. So and then every average worker has a long-term stake, even if they, retire, they have a plot of land that they have and they're supported and helped. They do occasionally lay people off and stuff like that. And it hasn't been perfect. I mean, there have been issues with it. But it's still here. It's been around since the late 40s. And it's a remarkable example. A lot of people are trying to emulate them in, places like Pittsburgh and what have you. They are also very green oriented. Yeah, so that's a huge example. But it's so big, Mondragon. Well, you could pronounce. I just pronounce it Mondragon, but you may be right. Mondragon. Mondragon. I speak French, but I use the American because I've been here so long. It's Basque, right? The Basques are an extraordinary people. If you look at their history, it's amazing. Yeah, it's got refrigerators. It's got everything. It's a very diversified company, but it's a huge thing, and it's been going on for a long time. It's not something it's not necessarily the prime example. If you want to start getting people, learning about how to do commoning and keeping it. And the other thing I should say, the commons is not a noun; it should be a verb. It's commoning. It's a whole approach to how you live, and that's the important point that they want to make. That it's an activity more than it's a sphere of anything called commoning.
And the cell phone allows individual participation in the whole.
That's right. And there's a whole bunch of things about, you may have heard of blockchain and the cryptocurrencies and stuff. Well, that's enabling, that's basically a distributed ledger, digital ledger, and it keeps track of everything. So you can keep track of money or of commitments, right? So you can create a carrying money as opposed to an abstract entity. In other words, you can actually, using blockchain, they're calling it holochain because it's for the commoning. It enables all kinds of interactions and relationships to occur that were impossible before that technology came along.
Doesn't it use an awful lot of electricity?
Yes, that is a problem. That is a problem. But they've been working on that. That's why they came up with the holochain as an alternative to the blockchain. Yeah.
But isn't that energy consumption due to mining?
It's the mining, right?
Virtual.
And the holochain gets away from the mining idea. They're making money and stuff like that. Yeah, right. But these kind of technologies are, and then there's all this quote AI technology that's allowing decision making to be made in a democratic way by millions of people, following certain kinds of rules, right? So, well, we don't want individual commoners to have a million person thing. We want, maybe 500 or 1,000, 2,000 people. But this technology, the software programs allow for a lot of intimate interaction to take place in decision making that is protective of people who disagree and allows a lot of the conflicts that come with eco-villages, personal conflicts, to be overcome. We've learned a lot about human relations and how to organize things. Yeah. Wikipedia is an example of commons. It is a commons, and I was going to, if I had time to get into that. And things like Linux, the operating system, that's another commons. So there's a bunch of those. They're all over the place. People just are waking up to it. Back in the feudal era, there was a lot of merchant activity, trading, a little bit of industry and stuff going. Nobody paid much attention to it, right? It was the serfs, farms, and the nobles, and they were all fighting all the time. And yet this underground, commercial industrial activity was going on, and all of a sudden, boom, it surfaced, in about the 16th, 17th century.
My son just crowdsourced a startup.
Sure.
And, the whole idea of Kickstarter.
Right, so all this crowdsourcing.
Is a financial common.
So the financial commoning, like crowdsourcing stuff, it is another example of being able to take on this huge financial sector that's been swallowing us up. That's why commoning is important, because it's a defense against that, and it enables a transformation. And by engaging in commoning and in these commons, you see people changing the way they think. It transforms their consciousness. People begin to think of a caring relationship in an economic transaction, and they change. And that's a remarkable thing. So it's a consciousness-raising exercise to be part of that stuff. Other questions?
What is the relationship to the federal government and state governments?
Well, this is the interesting thing. In fact, thank you for bringing that up, because national governments and federal governments don't like this kind of thing. They tend to be pretty, because it's a threat to the nation state. And we need the nation state to go away, by the way, just like they needed the feudal empires to go away and have the nation state back in the beginnings of capitalism. Now we need the nation state to go away, and we need the commons to come in. But the biggest allies of the commons and the greatest labs for the commons will be in the cities. And I believe we need to go back to the polis, to the city-state, as we get rid of the nation-state and start, and they have been allies of the commons, the cities, the urban environments, like I mentioned, Florence and, places like, yeah, exactly. So that's the level that the commons is going to break through on. It's the city and the city-state. It's going to be in the middle between the local community and the federal government. And that's where a lot of the great, exciting activities going on. So pay attention to what's going on in those cities. It's really quite incredible. I think you're going to see within the next 5 years, quite a few cities flip, and they're going to become commons. They're not going to be run on conventional urban. The question becomes, however, and I'm putting this up as a solution, along with my World War II mobilization, because I don't think the commons can come into full being in time to save the planet. But I think it has to be part of the process as we move to transition, if we can get that World War II mobilization. The only way I can think that the commons could achieve that is if the commons and the urban communities, the cities, got together and they told the federal and state governments, you either do this or we all go out on strike and we down tools. Or we reject, we do not recognize you as our political authority anymore. That's conceivable. And if I were to recommend to the younger generations what they should do, is they should try to go down that route, get the cities to mobilize, because they're on the front lines. They're the ones who are going to take it in the neck on climate change. And mayors can't get away with, like senators can, just, oh, it's the bureaucracy. They have to meet the needs. So mayors are motivated and cities are motivated. And that's what we're all moving to anyways, where cities are. They're also very environmentally efficient, because you have a lot of people in a small space, they don't burn as much energy and so.
As part of this, the UN Sustainable Development Strategy.
Sure.
Cities like Heidelberg,
Yeah.
are really moving in this stuff. They're using those place-based approaches and help the federal government.
Right. And you can see all, anthroposophy and Steiner weaving through all of this stuff. This is tailor-made for us. We should be allying with this, bringing the message or using our knowledge and skills. And there's a lot of talented people in this community. I mean, to support this and to help this along. I mean, the Commons needs help, but it has such enormous potential. Anybody else? Okay, thank you very much.